Imagine spending your entire life searching for truth, only to realize that everything you once believed in was meaningless. Imagine reaching the peak of success, wealth, and fame, yet feeling as if you are standing on the edge of a vast, dark abyss. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It was the reality of one of the greatest writers and thinkers in history, Leo Tolstoy. Most people know Tolstoy as the literary genius behind War and Peace and Anna Karenina, two of the most celebrated novels ever written. But what many do not realize is that behind his literary achievements was a man tormented by an existential crisis so profound that it nearly drove him to take his own life. He had everything society tells us should make us happy. Money, recognition, a loving family, but none of it could answer the fundamental question that haunted him. What is the meaning of life? Perhaps you too have wrestled with this question at some point. Maybe in the quiet moments of your day, when distractions fade away, you have felt that unsettling whisper in the back of your mind. Why am I here? What is the point of all this? If so, you are not alone. The search for meaning is a struggle as old as humanity itself, and few people have explored it as deeply as Tolstoy did. In today's journey, we will uncover the profound transformation of a man who, despite achieving everything the world had to offer, was drowning in despair. We will follow his quest for truth through philosophy, science, and religion until he arrived at an answer that changed not only his life, but has the potential to change yours as well. And the most powerful revelation of all? That will come at the end, and it may be the key to unlocking a new way of seeing your own existence. Leo Tolstoy was born in 1828 into one of Russia's most aristocratic families. His youth was marked by privilege, pleasure, and indulgence. He lived a life of excess, gambling away fortunes, engaging in reckless affairs, and constantly seeking the next thrill. Like many young intellectuals of his time, he believed in the power of reason, in the promise of science, in the progress of humanity. Yet, despite his passionate pursuit of knowledge, something always felt missing. By his 40s, Tolstoy had achieved literary immortality. War and Peace was hailed as a masterpiece, a monumental work that captured the complexity of history, human, nature, and destiny. Anna Karenina followed, an intricate exploration of love, morality, and society. He had won the admiration of the world, and yet the more he accomplished, the more he was tormented by a chilling realization. Death would eventually erase everything. His achievements, his books, his reputation, all would disappear. He wrote in his journal, "Is there any meaning in my life that will not be annihilated by the inevitability of death?" Tolstoy was not alone in this existential despair. Throughout history, the greatest minds have wrestled with this very question. Thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer described life as a cycle of suffering, where desires lead only to temporary satisfaction before giving way to new cravings. Friedrich Nietzsche famously declared that traditional sources of meaning, religion, morality, culture, were illusions that humanity had outgrown. Even modern psychology, with all its advancements, has struggled to provide a definitive answer to the question that haunted Tolstoy. Why live at all? Desperate for answers, he turned to philosophy. He immersed himself in the works of Plato, Socrates, Kant, and Descartes, searching for a logical foundation for existence. But instead of clarity, he found contradictions. Each system of thought offered its own interpretation of reality, yet none could provide an objective, universal meaning to life. Science, too, left him disillusioned. It could explain how the universe functioned, but it could not tell him why it existed in the first place. He had reached an impasse. If reason and knowledge could not provide meaning, then what could? Tolstoy found himself drawn to the simplest, most overlooked source of wisdom, the lives of ordinary people. He observed that peasants, those who lived humble and uneducated lives, did not suffer from the same existential torment that plagued the intellectual elite. Despite having little wealth, little power, and no philosophical education, they lived with a quiet, unshakable sense of purpose. What did they know that he did not? As Tolstoy began to examine their lives, he noticed a pattern. Their meaning did not come from logic, science, or even personal ambition. It came from faith, not blind faith, but an intrinsic belief that life was connected to something greater than the self. They did not question the meaning of life every day, because for them, it was self-evident. Life had meaning because it was part of something larger, something sacred. This discovery shook Tolstoy to his core. All his life he had placed his trust in reason, yet reason had led him to despair. The peasants, on the other hand, who had no formal education in philosophy or science, possessed the very thing he had spent decades searching for: inner peace. This was the turning point in Tolstoy's journey. He began to explore religion, not as a set of rituals, but as a source of deeper truth. He studied Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam, trying to uncover the common thread that connected all faiths. What he found was not dogma, not institutions, but a universal truth that had been echoed by sages and prophets for millennia. And here is where Tolstoy's story takes an even more profound turn. Because the realization he came to, the answer he discovered, was not what most would expect. It was not the religion of the church, nor the philosophy of scholars, nor the conclusions of science. It was something far more fundamental, something that had been hidden in plain sight all along. We are only beginning to uncover the depths of Tolstoy's transformation, and in the next part, we will explore the moment when everything changed, the moment when he finally understood what had been missing all along, and most importantly, how. His discovery may hold the key to answering the question that has haunted humanity for centuries. But before we continue, I want you to reflect on this. If everything you believe about life turned out to be an illusion, would you be ready to see the truth? Tolstoy's crisis reached its breaking point when he found himself unable to go on with life as it was. He wrote in his diary that he had lost the ability to live, that every action seemed meaningless, that even the love of his family and the beauty of the world around him could not silence the gnawing question within him. Why does anything matter if death will erase it all? He considered all the possible answers that society offered. He saw that people dealt with the absurdity of life in different ways. Some, like the ignorant masses, simply refused to think about it. Others, like the hedonists, drowned their despair in pleasure, distracting themselves with wealth, love, or entertainment. Then, there were those who, like the philosophers, tried to reason their way through life, building complex systems of thought to justify existence. And finally, there were those who, recognizing the meaninglessness of everything, simply ended their lives. Tolstoy saw himself in the last group. He admitted that if he had not been afraid of death, he would have already taken his own life. But there was something inside him that held him back, something deeper than logic, something that whispered that there was still an answer waiting to be found. His search led him to an unexpected realization, one that shook the very foundation of his beliefs. He had spent his entire life looking for meaning in external achievements, in intellectual mastery, in the validation of others. But what if meaning was never meant to be found in the world outside? What if it was something internal, something deeply personal, something that could not be measured or explained by logic alone? For the first time, Tolstoy began to consider the idea that perhaps reason was not the ultimate tool for understanding life. Perhaps the truth he was searching for could not be proven in the way a mathematical equation could be solved, but could only be felt, experienced, and lived. This realization led him back to the wisdom of the peasants, the simple people who lived without questioning the meaning of life, yet possessed a quiet certainty about their place in the world. They were not tormented by the thoughts that consumed him. Why? Because they lived by faith. Faith. This was a word that Tolstoy had long dismissed. As an intellectual, he had seen faith as an outdated concept, a relic of an unenlightened past. He had assumed that belief in something beyond reason was a sign of weakness, a way for people to escape the harsh realities of existence. But now, standing at the edge of despair, he began to see it differently. Faith he realized, was not about blindly accepting religious doctrine. It was not about believing in fairy tales or supernatural forces. It was something much more essential. Faith was the conviction that life had meaning, even if that meaning could not be fully explained. It was the belief that existence was part of a greater order, a higher purpose, even if the full nature of that purpose remained unknown. This revelation did not come easily to him. He resisted it, fought against it, tried to disprove it. But the more he searched for meaning through logic alone, the more he saw the limitations of reason. Science could describe the mechanics of the universe, but it could not tell him why the universe existed in the first place. Philosophy could analyze the structures of thought, but it could not give him a reason to keep living. In contrast, faith provided something that reason never could, an answer that satisfied the soul. Tolstoy turned to the teachings of Jesus, not as an institutionalized religion, but as a philosophy of life. He was drawn not to the dogma of the church, which he saw as corrupt and self-serving, but to the simple, powerful truths that lay at the heart of Christ's message. Love, humility, service, and the idea that life's purpose was not found in personal ambition, but in connection with others. The more he explored this idea, the more he saw it reflected in other traditions as well. The Buddha had taught that suffering came from attachment, that true peace came from surrendering the ego. Hindu philosophy spoke of the illusion of the self, the interconnectedness of all things. The Stoics believed that wisdom came from accepting life as it was, rather than constantly fighting against it. Slowly, Tolstoy began to reconstruct his understanding of life. He let go of the desperate need to explain everything through reason alone and embraced a deeper, more intuitive understanding. He saw that meaning was not something to be found in books, in wealth, or in fame. Meaning was something to be lived. He abandoned his previous way of life. He rejected his aristocratic privileges, renounced his wealth, and sought to live as simply as possible. He dedicated himself to serving others, to practicing kindness, to embracing a life of humility. And for the first time in decades, he felt peace. But here is where we must pause and ask a question. Is faith really the answer? Tolstoy found his meaning through faith, but does that mean the same path will work for everyone? This is where his story takes an even more fascinating turn, because while he believed he had solved the riddle of life, his journey did not end there. In fact, his new understanding led him into even greater conflict, both with the world around him and within himself. In the next part, we will explore the consequences of Tolstoy's transformation, how his newfound beliefs challenged the very foundations of society, how they led to his rejection by the church, and how they even created turmoil within his own family. But perhaps most importantly, we will confront the most difficult question of all. If meaning is something we must create for ourselves, how do we know if we have chosen the right path? Let that question sit with you for a moment, because what comes next may challenge everything you think you know about meaning, purpose, and the very nature of existence itself. Tolstoy's transformation was not just personal, it became a revolution. In thought, one that would challenge the very fabric of the world around him. He had found an answer to his own crisis, but that answer came with consequences, because the moment he embraced a life of faith, simplicity, and moral clarity, he found himself at odds with nearly everything he had once been a part of. The first to feel the weight of his change was his own family. His wife, Sophia, who had stood by him through his years of literary triumph, was devastated by his rejection of wealth and status. For decades, she had managed his estate, supported his career, and helped publish his masterpieces. Now he was turning his back on everything they had built together. He no longer believed in private property, no longer saw value in material success, no longer cared for the aristocratic life that had once defined them. This led to deep conflicts between them. She begged him not to give away their wealth, fearing for the future of their children. She accused him of being irresponsible, of abandoning his duties as a husband and father in pursuit of an impossible ideal. Tolstoy in turn saw her resistance as proof of the corruption of society, a world where even love and family could be consumed by greed and attachment to possessions. But his conflict with Sophia was only the beginning. His radical new beliefs soon made him an enemy of the very institution that claimed to uphold faith, the Russian Orthodox Church. Tolstoy believed that the Church had betrayed the true teachings of Christ. He saw how religion had been twisted to serve the powerful, how it had become an instrument of oppression rather than liberation. The Church preached obedience to the state, supported war, and demanded blind submission, all while accumulating wealth and influence. In Tolstoy's eyes, this was not the message of Jesus. The real essence of Christ's teachings, he argued, was a call to love, to serve others, to reject violence and materialism. He wrote extensively about his criticisms of organized religion, and for this, the Church condemned him. In 1901, he was officially excommunicated. This was a public rejection, a declaration that Tolstoy was no longer part of the faith he had embraced so deeply. But instead of breaking him, this rejection only confirmed what he already believed, that truth was not found in institutions, in rituals, or in doctrines, but in the way one lived their life. He continued to preach his ideas, spreading his message through essays, letters, and even direct action. He inspired a movement, groups of followers, now known as the Tolstoyans, who sought to live according to his vision. They rejected wealth, refused to participate in violence, and sought to live in harmony with nature and with each other. His writings would go on to influence some of the greatest figures of the 20th century, including Mahatma Gandhi, who credited Tolstoy with shaping his philosophy of nonviolent resistance. But despite all of this, despite having seemingly found the answer to life's greatest question, Tolstoy was not at peace. The battle between his ideals and reality was relentless. The tension in his family never resolved. The world did not embrace his vision the way he had hoped. Even among his followers, contradictions and divisions emerged. And so, in 1910, at the age of 82, Tolstoy did something that shocked everyone. He walked away from everything. One night, without telling his family, he left his home, taking only a few possessions with him. He boarded a train, heading into the unknown. His health was failing, his body weak, but he was driven by an overwhelming need to escape, to live fully by the principles he had come to believe in. It was during this journey that Tolstoy fell gravely ill. Stranded at a remote railway station, he was taken to a small caretaker's home where he spent his final days. He was surrounded by a few close companions, but not by his family. His wife arrived only after it was too late. And there, in that humble setting, one of the greatest minds in history took his final breath. His death was a moment of reflection for the world. Here was a man who had everything: fame, fortune, power, yet had given it all up in search of a truth deeper than any worldly success. And whether or not one agrees with his conclusions, one thing is undeniable: he lived and died in relentless pursuit of meaning. But here is where the real question lies. Did Tolstoy truly find the ultimate answer? He believed that faith gave life meaning, but he also struggled with doubt until the very end. He rejected the material world, yet he could never fully escape its pull. He sought to change humanity, yet humanity continued in its ways, unchanged. So, what does this tell us? What can we learn from Tolstoy's search? In the final part of this journey, we will uncover the deeper implications of his life and legacy. Was he a visionary who saw what others could not, or was he a man who simply could not accept the reality of existence? And more importantly, how? Can his struggle help you find meaning in your own life? Because the answer Tolstoy found may not be the answer for everyone, and what comes next may just change the way you see everything. Tolstoy's search for meaning was one of the most profound intellectual and spiritual journeys in history. He confronted life's greatest questions, stripped away illusions, and sought truth with an intensity that few dare to match. And yet, even at the end of his life, there remained contradictions, paradoxes that make his story all the more powerful. So now we must ask, what can we take from Tolstoy's search? What does his struggle teach us about the meaning of life? Perhaps the first lesson is this: the search for meaning is not a destination. It is a way of living. Tolstoy never settled. He never reached a single absolute conclusion and stayed there. Instead, he lived in constant evolution. He changed, he questioned, he doubted, and he redefined his beliefs over and over again. He moved from literature to philosophy, from aristocracy to asceticism, from skepticism to faith. His life was not about finding a final answer. It was about continuously engaging with the question. This challenges us to rethink how we approach meaning in our own lives. Many of us long for certainty, for a single truth that will resolve all doubts and give us peace. But Tolstoy's life suggests that meaning is not something we arrive at. It is something we live through. It is a process, an unfolding experience, a continual exploration. The second lesson is even more challenging. Meaning is something we create, not something we find. Tolstoy began his journey looking for an external answer, something that would explain life from the outside. He sought meaning in literature, in reason, in philosophy. But in the end, what gave him a reason to live was not a universal truth handed down from above. It was a choice, a commitment, a decision to believe that life mattered, even if he could not prove it with logic alone. This is one of the most difficult yet liberating realizations we can have. Meaning is not something waiting to be discovered. It is something we bring into existence through the way we live. This means that each of us has the power to shape our own sense of purpose. We do not need to wait for the perfect answer to appear. We do not need to have everything figured out before we begin living fully. Instead, we can choose to find meaning in love, in creativity, in service, in connection. We can build our own purpose, just as Tolstoy built his. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: even the greatest minds struggle with meaning, and that is okay. Tolstoy was one of the most brilliant thinkers of all time, yet he wrestled with doubt until his final days. He was never entirely free from questions, never completely at peace. And yet, his life was not a failure. It was a testament to the courage it takes to ask the deepest questions, even when answers remain elusive. So if you have ever felt lost, if you have ever wondered what the point of it all is, if you have ever struggled with the fear that life may not have a clear meaning, know that you are not alone. You are in the company of one of the greatest minds who ever lived. But the difference between despair and purpose is not the absence of questions. It is what we do with them. Tolstoy chose to live his questions, to embrace them, to let them shape him rather than paralyze him. And this is what we can do as well. So as we end this journey, I leave you with a question. What meaning are you choosing to create? Because in the end, the meaning of life is not something that will be handed to you. It is something you must claim for yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that is the most powerful answer of all. Thanks for looking.